Daf Chof Ches Amud Beis, 8 lines from the top. The Gemara now is going to discuss the time for the Hakrova of the Korban Tomid. Tomid shall be in Harabayim, which is the same time as we daven Mincha. The time of Mincha is tied to the Hakrova of the Tomid shall be in Harabayim, so that is the same time as the beginning time that we are allowed to, the earliest time that we're allowed to daven Mincha. Amar Safra, Shleisa Davrom, the davening, the tefillah of Avram Avinu, meaning tefillas Mincha, Mekim Meshachrei Kaisli, when the walls start to cast a shadow. At noon, at midday, the sun is directly overhead in the sky. So when it's directly overhead, if it would be on top, shining over a wall, for instance, on the tips of the wall, the edges of the wall, there would be a shadow, even on the easterly side. As the sun, after noon, starts to move towards the west, so the shadows are no longer present on the east. So the beginning time, the commencement is noon. That's the time of Mincha. Why is it called Shleisa Avram? We know that Avram Avinu was Masechet Shachris, and Yitzchak Avinu was Masechet Mincha. That was Yitzchak Avinu. The Shon explains that Yitzchak Avinu was Masechet it for future generations, but the initiation of it was Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu started davening Mincha. He initiated Tfilas Mincha. Yitzchak Avinu, he carried it forward for future generations, Masechet it for his descendants as well. So that's the time for Mincha. Rav Yosef, he asked a question, shall we learn from Avram Avinu? Yes, Avram Avinu, he davened there. Avram Avinu was the Zorias, and he did things that were so was able to be makpid and do things in a proper time, and the Zorias in an earlier time. Do we learn out from Avram Avinu's conduct as to what we should do as well? We're not on that madrega. Rava Tana Gamam Avram. We learned the Tana. We do learn from Avram, notwithstanding that the differences between Shemaim and Aretz, but we still learn we do learn out from the Anhaga, the conduct of Avram Avinu. Tana Gamar Avram Vanan Loy Gamrin. Meaning the Tana learns out from Avram, so we should not learn out from him. This time we learned in the Brisa, B'yom Hashmini Yimel B'sar Lo. So the pasuk says that on the 8th day is the day for the Milah. Melamed Shekol Hayom Kasher LaMilah. That teaches us that the whole day is kosher for the Milah. It can be done the entire 8th day. Ela Shasriz Magdim LaMitzvahs. But we do it at the beginning of the day because Zriz Magdim LaMitzvahs. We do it at the first possible time. Where do we see this precedent of Zriz Magdim LaMitzvahs? Shenemar Vayashkim Avram B'Bayke V'Yachavesh. Avram Avinu got up early in the morning, so he rose up early in the morning to do the Akedos Yitzchak. So he did it at the very beginning of the day. So Zriz Magdimim LaMitzvahs. So you see, we do learn out from Avram Avinu. So here also, why don't we learn out? We can learn out from Avram Avinu. So Elamar Rava says in a Chanami, but Rav Yosef HaKashilai. This is HaKashilai. This is the kasha that he had. This non we learned in the Mishnah Psachim Echal Arvei Psachim Liyais Erev Shabbos. If Erev Pesach, the time that you're makriv the Korban Pesach, Yudal Ben Nisan, if it falls out on Erev Shabbos, so you need more time now. You need more time to do the avodah of the Korban Pesach. You need more time to do the avodah and to do the roasting of the Korban Pesach as well. So we're makdim the Tomid Shel Bein Harabayim because the Korban Pesach is done after the Tomid Shel Bein Harabayim. So we make the Tomid Shel Bein Harabayim, or makdim it, we do it earlier than normal in order to give us more time in the afternoon. So therefore, if that's the case, the Tomid Shel Bein Harabayim is the shlit is at 6.5 hours of the day. So we make it earlier and bring it forward to 6.5 hours in the day. The Kara b'Sheva Machsa, and we're makriv it at 7.5 hours of the day. Now, if you're telling me that Chatzos, that noon is the time for the Tomid, noon is the time of Tomid and Mincha, well, on Erev Pesach, and when it's on Shabbos, Erev Shabbos, we want to gain as much time as possible. So if that's the case, why aren't we makdim it mamish til chatzos? Why don't we do the shchita when the shadows are started to cast? So we are looking to gain some time over here. We should make it earlier. if that in fact is the time that's kosher. What's the kasha? Maybe the walls of the base of Mikdash were different, and they only started to darken at 6.5 hours of the day. Because they're not straight. They're wider at the base, narrower on the top. So perhaps by noon, and because of the construction of the wall, at noon it's still light, the sun is still shining on the eastern side. It starts to darken at 6.5 hours a day, and as the Ritva explains, and therefore, if you started davening at Chatzos, even though Chatzos is the time, even though if you did the Talmud Shalbein Harbaim at Chatzos, even though Chatzos is the time for the Talmud, even though the Chatzos is the time for Mincha, but people will think that it's really before Chatzos, and they'll think that you can do the Talmud and you can daven before Chatzos. Inami, alternatively, Shiny Avram Avinu is different. It's Tagmei Nisai, Gedol Haisamot. He was an expert in astrology, and he knew exactly when Chatzos was. So therefore, he could determine it, and he knew when Chatzos was. But we are not such experts. Inami Mishum Zaken Yeshim Yeshiva. He was a great Talmud Chacham, so he could determine exactly when Chatzos was, so he could daven at Chatzos. But as the Ritva explains, we're not Bikim, we're not such experts, and therefore we need an extra half hour to ensure that we don't do it too early. Now, where do we see that a Rambam is under Talmud Chacham, Dama, Rabbi Chama, Rabbi Chanina, Mimeim Shalaviseno, Leparshi Yeshiva Mehem? We see that from the time of the always even, there was always yeshiva. They were always learning yeshiva, Talmidei Chachamim. Ayu b'Mitzrayim yeshiva moim. When they were in Mitzrayim, they had yeshiva, Shenamra, Leich Vasavta, Ziknei Yisrael. So you see they had Zakenim. They had Zakenim, Zaken is Misha Zesha Kana Chachma. Ayu b'Midbar yeshiva moim, Shenamra, Asli Yeshiva Misha Ziknei Yisrael. So we see that they had yeshivas there as well. Avram Avinu Zaken v'Yeshiv Yeshiva. He was a Zaken v'Yeshiv Yeshiva Shnamra v'Avram Zaken Babi Yamin. He was a Zaken Babi Yamin. What does it mean by Babi Yamin? He was an elder, but he says he was a Zaken Babi Yamin. He was, and besides being advanced in years, he was a Zaken, meaning the meaning of the Zaken here is Shekana Chachama. He was Zaken, he was Talmud Chacham. Yitzchak Avinu Zaken v'Yeshiv Yeshiva Haya Shenemar v'Hi Ki Zaken Yitzchak. He became a Zaken. Yaakov Avinu Zaken v'Yeshiv Yeshiva Haya. He as well Shenemar v'Eina Yisrael Kavdam Zaken. That his eyesight was failing. So as the Ritva explains, because he was Isaac in the Torah so much, the Torah mateshes Kaichish Aladam, and therefore his eyes were failing. Eliezer and Avram Zaken v'Yeshiv Yeshiva. He was also Zaken Yeshiv Yeshiva. Shnemar v'Yomer Avram al Avdei Zakan Beisai HaMoshe B'chol Asher Loi. So you see, he as well was a Zaken Yeshiv Yeshiva. Amar Rabbi Elazar, what is the Moshe B'chol Asher Loi? Shemoshe B'Toras Rabbi. That he was Moshe, he had rule, he had dominion over the Torah of Avram Avinu. What does that mean? The Maharsha explains, meaning he had the authority to be meiser this Torah of Avram Avinu, to establish yeshiva and pass it down to future generations. Who Damesik Eliezer? He is called Eliezer, called Damesik Eliezer. Amar Rabbi Elazar Shadayla Umashka Mitirasa Shel Rabbi Lachirim. He drew from the Torah of his master Avram Avinu, so to speak, like drawing from a well, and gave others to drink. So he passed it on, and he fed it to others. He taught the Torah to others. Amarav, he said, Kim Avram Avinu, and Avram Avinu called the Torah Kula. He was Mekayim, called the Torah Kula. Shenemar Eikav Asher Sham Avram Bekoili. It says, Avram, listen to my voice. So Avram listened to my voice, meaning that he was, and therefore, he was Mekayim the Kol Torah, Mekayim everything in the Torah. The Pasuk itself says that Eikav Asher Shama Avram Bekoili, it says, Vayishmar Mishmati Mitzvayse Chukoisai V'Sai Raisai. So he was Mekayim everything. Amar alei Rav Shimi Barchi Lurav ve'ema sheva mitzvahs. How do you know it's kol Torah kula? Maybe it's only zayin mitzvahs. No, it can't be only zayin mitzvahs. Gemara answers because ha'ikar mila. We know that he was mekayim the mitzvah of mila as well. Correct. The Gemara ve'ema sheva mitzvahs of mila. But still, how do you know it was kol Torah kula? Maybe it was zayin mitzvahs b'nei noach plus the mitzvah of mila. Amrle, he answered, Imkain mitzvah. So why does the pasuk elaborate and it says that that means therefore it's broadening to include kol Torah kula. Amar Rav Ravashi Kim Avram Avinu Afilo a Ruve Tavshil. Avram Avinu is becoming kol Torah kula, even a Ruve Tavshilin. The Din Rabbanan, the Takana de Rabbanan, that in order to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos, to make an Erev Tavshilin, to be ma'ar with an Erev, to put food, especially for that, the food for designated for this Erev. So Rashi explains, this is a pure Derabanan, it's not a halach l'may shemisina, he was mekayim even that. Shenema Teirosai. It's achatar b'shksav, achatar shabal peh. It says it in the plural Teirosai. It says to the plural, so it says it in the plural. Torah shabal shabal peh. And it elaborate on it that it's even something which is a derabanan. Masi ben Shmuel Omer. So now the Gemara returns to the topic of the Mishnah. So when we discussed in the Mishnah, they inquired if it was already daytime, that if it was time now, that they can begin the avodah of the Talmud Shel Shachar. So Masi ben Shmuel Omer. It says, was it Heir Mizrach? V'hu Omer Hein. So this was the dialogue that we had in the Mishnah, and the Gemara is now analyzing what exactly this dialogue was. The Mishnah said that Omer Lema Muna, the Muna said, Tzurim Yegia Zman HaShchit, to go see if it's the time of shechting the Ton Shel Shachar, and if he Yegia, the Roy Yomer Barkai. So now it says, Masi ben Shmuel Omer, he says, here Penei Kol Mizrach. He says the entire eastern sky was lit up. Ad Shebechevron, Hu Omer Hein. So the Gemara is analyzing what exactly is the dialogue over here. What was the Masa Matan? So Man Omer Hein, who is the one that said yes? If it's the one who's standing on the roof, so he's the one who is standing on the roof and he's saying it, and saying that it's her Mizrach, who Cholim v'hu Mefasher. He has a dream and he interprets his dream, so it's a mashal. Someone has a dream, he's the one who interprets his dream. So he's asking the question, so if all this conversation is the person standing on the roof, he's asking the question, he's giving the answer. He's asking, is it Her Penei Mizrach, and he's answering yes to his own question? So if the people are on the ground, how do they know what the situation is? How do they know if it's hair? How can they know better than the person standing on the roof? So Gemara says, you could say one approach is that it's talking about the one who's standing on the ground, not on the roof. And alternatively, a different approach is as follows. It's referring to the one standing on the ground. Amar Iu Hair Penei Kol HaMizrach. The one on the ground asked, "Does it light up? Is it light the whole eastern sky?" Amar Lei, and the one on the roof said, "Ache b'Chevron." He said, "Until Chevron." And Amar Lei, and the one on the ground said, "Yes, that's what I wanted to know." Meaning, he asked him initially, "Is it lit up? Is the eastern sky lit up?" He didn't ask him about Chevron, but the one on the roof said it's lit up until Chevron, and he said, "Yes, that's really what I wanted to know." So why did they need all of this? Why was it necessary to ensure to be so careful? Because at one time they saw the light of the moon, and they mistakenly assumed it was the light of the sun, and that it was already daytime, and they shechted the tamid b'psul, and they had to take it out levesis reifa. The Gemara Omi Mechlav. Can you confuse the sun of the moon with the sun? Can you confuse rather the light of the moon with the light of the sun? Now, Tanya, we learned, Brisa was taught, Rabbi Omer Eina Dema Timur Shel Levana Timur Shel Chama. The shaft of the light of the moon is not similar to the one from the sun. Why is that? Timur shalavana metamar v'ilakamakel. The light of the moon goes straight up. It doesn't spread out. It's not diffused. But timur shalchama mimapsiya lekan lekan. But the light of the sun, it spreads out. It's diffused all over to a broad area. So it's clear which is the light of the moon or the light of the sun. So Tana Rabbi Shmuel answers, it was a cloudy day, and therefore even the moonlight was diffused through the clouds, so it was spread about and spread apart, and therefore it was confused with the light of the sun. You can learn out from here that on a cloudy day you can feel the sun everywhere, even though there's cloud and it's covering, there's a cloud cover, but the sun, the light of the sun and the heat of the sun is diffused, and you can feel it all over. So my nafkamina, what's a practical nafkamina? L'shetuchayers, to spread out skins, the hides to dry. So you spread out to dry, it will get dry in all places because the sunlight is diffused. That on Erev Pesach, a woman should not knead the dough in the sun or water heated by the sun, because you have to be careful. The heat causes it to be machmetz, causes it to ferment more quickly, and there's a greater possibility, a greater chance it'll become chametz. Therefore, a person should be careful not to knead the dough outdoors, because it might hasten the chimutz. So therefore, since this is the case, that she should not knead the dough even on a cloudy day outside, even if it's a cloudy day, so she might think there's no sunlight. No, the light of the sun, the heat of the sun penetrates the clouds, and therefore this would apply even on a cloudy day.